and then we will start rolling here.
I went ahead and started recording, Lori.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to Sherry. She does the technical side of this, and I don't give her credit often enough, but she does the marketing, she does the slides, and she makes sure that this all rolls appropriately when the time comes. So if you don't know Sherry, get to know her. So,
unfortunately, when it doesn't work, it's also my fault usually.
Yes,
so.
Yes it is. So, okay. How about we just honor everybody's time? I appreciate, oh, Megan says options is her word for the hour. So thanks, Megan. So I do want to honor everybody's time. So Chad's got a lot of great information to share with us today. So I just want to take this opportunity and get started if we can. So welcome, if I haven't already said that to you. I'm Lori Ferguson, and welcome to today's online HomeNE webinar. I'm with South Central Economic Development. We are office in Holdridge, and I will be your tour guide for today's conversation. We have approximately 55 people actually registered for today, but as you may have heard me say in the ramp up to our 2 o'clock hour, we have a couple of watch parties going on, and we love to hear that from you. So we have over 55 people registered to hear Chad Nabity. He is with the Hall County Regional Planning Office, and I'm excited to have Chad share today on the important role of what a community redevelopment authority can play in our local housing development. I first became acquainted with Chad a couple of years ago when he helped me navigate a project that was probably very simple to him, but rather complex for me. He made it understandable, and I'm looking forward to him doing that for us today as a group. So, of those who have registered, we have 10 first-time participants. So I want to welcome especially those new attendees and say a thank you to all of you who are joining us and taking time out of your day. This HomeNE Learning Network continues to grow, and today we have had, over the course of almost 2 years now, we've had 102 different communities represented in these webinars. So let's take a look at the agenda here quickly. Okay. We will be hearing shortly from Chad Nabity. Following his presentation, we'll be opening it up for some Q&A. And I've asked Chad maybe to think of some questions he might have for us as a group. So be ready for that. And also then we'll conclude with some group discussion and final thoughts. Before I turn it over to Sharon Heffley, our Executive Director here at SCED, I want to encourage you to take a few moments throughout the time, use your chat box and write down questions or comments that you might have for Chad. We'll be monitoring and responding to your comments or questions as you enter them, and as time allows, sending those to Chad for answering or for additional conversation. So HomeNE is a learning network I shared earlier, and we learn best when we interact and engage with each other. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon.
Hey, all right, I'm even unmuted, so that's special. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. This is our October edition of the HomeNE 2019 webinar series, and that means we're almost to 2 years, so that's really exciting working with this network. HomeNE program is a learning network, and it's geared towards housing in rural communities, and so that's why we could talk about a lot of things that CRAs could do, but today it's really going to be wrapped around housing. Our HomeNE network provides face-to-face and online opportunities to foster interaction, engagement, and skill building for local leaders and conveners. Conveners. I think a lot of us are conveners. I want you to think about that. When you hear these things and you think, not me, I don't want to go rehab a house, or I don't want to go do this, or I'm not on the CRA, but you're the convener, which also means you might plant seeds, you might fertilize them, you might water them. Sometimes you might pull out some weeds. But HomeNE was established in 2017, like I said, monthly webinars, 2 events, and we are excited. We had a great gathering in Schuyler in June, so we are excited to invite you all to come to Holdridge next month. It's just a few weeks away here. If you are on your computer, you can see where attendees participants in our webinars are from. And I'm excited. I'm taking this map to Reno with me, and I'm going to share what all has been happening with all of you being involved in our HomeNE Learning Network. And so we're going to get to tell all the states, all the development districts across the state what's going on in Nebraska. South Central Economic Development District acts as a lead agent, and each event is intended to empower you as the participant to immediately learn what you hear today. So, like Lori said, we're going to hear from Chad Nabity today of the Hall County Regional Planning Office in Grand Island. Let me tell you a little bit about Chad quick. Chad has been the planning director for the Hall County Regional Planning Commission since December of 1999. Wow, that's 20 years, Chad. Hall County Planning Commission provides planning services to not only Hall County, but also the cities of Grand Island, Wood River, and the villages of Alda, Donovan, and Caro. And since 2004, he's been the director of the Grand Island Community Redevelopment Authority. He's a professional planner with a Master's of Community and Regional Planning from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. He's a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners and has a variety of experience in planning issues in Nebraska, ranging from work with the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services related to infectious and communicable disease prevention planning, and work with the Nebraska Department of Economic Development researching affordable housing in Nebraska. And he also has experience with county and municipal land use planning in Madison and Hall counties. So on a personal note, Chad and his family have run an urban farm, a small community-supported agricultural operation at their home called GI Acres. So Chad, with that, welcome, and I'll hand it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Sound good.
Very good. And I think I have control of the screen now, so we'll hope this works. If not, we'll turn it back over to Sherry. Do I need to do something different? Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. Thank you for putting up with this, and with my inexperience with actually conducting webinars. I sit in on lots of them, but don't get to participate all that much. I hope everybody can hear me. What we're going to talk about today is how the CRA can, how your CRA or your CDA, Community Development Authority, could potentially be a partner for developing housing within your communities. I'm going to go through, is it working? Okay. There's three basic things that I want to talk about, and I'm going to talk about the CRA levy, which is authorized under statute. And you'll see here, I've got statutory references here for you. So if you get done with this, and when you get a copy of this, if your attorney says, can we really do that? You can say, well, here's the statutory reference. You tell me if we can do this. So these are all from Chapter 18 of statutes. And yes, I believe that you will be getting copies of the slides. So I sent them with the idea that you would get copies of them. So the CRA levy, the broad powers of public bodies to aid redevelopment, and that's any public body, not just the CRA. And then using tax increment financing with microblight and scattered site housing. And some examples of how we've done that here in Grand Island to create some infill housing and some things that I think are probably very appropriate in numerous communities across the state of Nebraska, if you're willing to make that process work. Go ahead and feel free to ask questions as I go through this. I want to give you the information that you want, more so than the information I'm going to provide. You'll get a copy of the slides anyway, so you'll get that as we go through this. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the CRA levy. The CRA has the authority to have their own levy, and The levy can be up to 2 6/10 cents on each $100 of taxable value on every property in the city. So what does that really mean? Well, there's 578 municipalities in the state of Nebraska, and in 2010, Scotia and Long Pine were the median-sized municipality in the city, or in the state of Nebraska, with 318 people. So half of the communities had more than 318 and half had less. I called the Greeley County assessor last week and said, what's the total valuation of Scotia? Total valuation of Scotia is just over $10 million. With a possible levy of 0.026 per $100 valuation, the levy would generate about $2,700, or a little over $2,700. I'm not sure that that's really a big enough number to make it worth trying to impose the levy and taking it through the process, but it does give you some idea of what could be done. A municipality with a valuation of $100,000 would generate $26,000. And Grand Island does have a levy. Our levy is about 2.2 cents per $100 valuation. And we generate almost $700,000 because of the valuation of the community. When you start generating that much money, it really does mean that you have some ability to do some things and to spend some money that's coming from a different source than your general property tax, even though it is part of that general property tax. It does have to be approved by the city council, and it has to be approved by the city council annually. But once you've got it in place, it does give you some ability to start doing things. And when you start building the valuation of your community, it has more benefit. So that's one of the things that your CRA can do to be a partner. And potentially even that $2,700 for Scotia could be enough to incentivize somebody to build a single house within that community. So think about how you could use that and if you want to use that, but it is an option for you. The next is 182138, the public body cooperate in planning powers. In addition to any other provisions governing any public body set forth in community development law, for the purposes of aiding and cooperating in the planning, undertaking, and carrying out of a redevelopment project located within an area in which it is authorized to act, any public body, city, county, school district, NRD, anybody who is a public body may, upon such terms, with or without consideration as it may determine, and I'm going to go through a whole bunch of these from the statute, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I cherry picked ones that I thought might be most appropriate to this group and to talking about housing specifically. When you see the bold there, I did that so that you would see those, so that those would pop out to you. So public body is your municipality. It is your county. It is any of those other governing entities outside of the Community Redevelopment Authority, but they can cooperate with the Redevelopment Authority. The city of Grand Island used this with Husker Harvest Days and as a means to get funding to Husker Harvest Days from our occupation tax to help them with improvements that they made out to at the Husker Harvest Days site. The city of Grand Island transfers $200,000 every year to the CRA that the CRA can then transfer to Husker Harvest Days over a period of 10 years, as long as Husker Harvest Days continues holding the show that they've held for the last 40 years and they continue it for another 20. We thought that was a good investment. Can you do the same thing with housing? You certainly can if you have a way to get those funds. It's a way to transfer funds to the CRA, and the CRA can transfer them to the developer. You can also dedicate, sell, convey, or lease any of its interest in any property, or grant easements, licenses, or any other rights or privileges therein to an authority. If the city has half a dozen vacant lots that you're trying to figure out how to get redeveloped, the city could give those to the CRA, and the CRA could then convey those as part of a redevelopment plan to a developer. It may be a way to do a program where you give the lot away if somebody builds a house, and a way to make that a little bit cleaner in the overall transfer of that property, so that you don't get the neighbor next door who says, well, I'd have paid $1,000 more for that lot just to have it. So it's something that you can work with. The public body can incur the entire expense of any public improvements made by such public body in exercising the powers granted in this section. So they can actually provide the sewer, water, streets, all of the things necessary through a redevelopment plan, even if it was privately owned property and they wouldn't normally do that. That's another way that they could use this. They can do any and all things necessary or convenient to aid and cooperate in planning or carrying out of a redevelopment plan. The redevelopment plan is really the piece that the CRA puts together, or somebody puts together for the CRA, after an area has been declared blighted and substandard. So the beginning of the process is to declare it blighted and substandard, and the city council, the village board, says, we want to use redevelopment tools to aid in redevelopment of this specific area of our community. Or in the case of a village, potentially the entire village, because villages can declare 100% of the village limits as blighted and substandard. Once they've done that, you can go back and do a redevelopment plan. The redevelopment plan is necessary for tax increment financing and is part of the process of getting tax increment financing, which we'll talk about next. But it's also one of the, you can do other things with that redevelopment plan. We've done things with the redevelopment plan in Grand Island, doing a redevelopment plan that authorizes the CRA to spend a portion of their levy for commercial facade improvements, or more housing related, upper story residential within the downtown area, and specifying within this specific area, the CRA can create a grant program to offset the cost of life safety improvements, improvements to electrical systems, putting in sprinkler systems, putting in new water lines to support those sprinkler systems, all of those kinds of things that are not necessarily TIF related, but because we've passed a redevelopment plan that says we're going to do that and have the authority to do that, we do have the authority to transfer those public dollars to private entities. They can lend, grant, or contribute funds to an authority. So maybe it's getting your authority set up. The city of Grand Island actually loaned money to the Grand Island Community Redevelopment Authority back in 1994 to set up the authority and to do the first blight studies within the community and to get that up and running and started. And then the authority paid those back from the levy that was granted to the authority. When grant or contribute funds, we also did that with the example I gave from Husker Harvest Days. And with the upper story residential program, the city of Grand Island actually put in $100,000 of general tax dollar funds every year for 5 years, and the CRA matched that. Yes, thank you for mentioning questions. If you've got questions, feel free to ask those, because I really do want to talk about more what you want to hear than just what I want to say. The last thing that I've done, and you'll notice that these were, I'm going to go back here. I had 1, 6, 7, 8, and 9. I skipped a whole bunch of things from the statute. I skipped 2, 3, 4, and 5, and just cherry picked the ones that I thought were most appropriate to this. But go back and read that section of statute and see what things the public bodies are authorized to do to help redevelopment projects. And in order to do that, you do need the redevelopment plan. It does need to be blighted and substandard, and it does need to be an area that that public body has the authority to act in. So a county can act anywhere in the county. A municipality can act anywhere in their municipal limits, and potentially anywhere in their extraterritorial zoning jurisdiction, depending on the specific action that's being taken. You can employ any funds belonging to or within control of such public body, including funds derived from the sale or furnishing of property, service, or facilities to an authority, in the purchase of bonds or other obligations of an authority as the holder of such bonds or obligations, and exercise the rights connected therein or therewith. Meaning, again, it is a way to move funds and or property from the public hands to private hands through the CRA. One of the other considerations, many of you have probably followed the Veterans Home saga as it moved from Grand Island to Kearney, and the property was, most of it has been given back to the city of Grand Island at this point, except for the spot where the existing buildings are right now. One of the ways that that may get transferred to a private developer, if the state decides they cannot transfer that property directly to a private developer, they could transfer it to the Community Redevelopment Authority here in Grand Island, who could then transfer it to the developer. So there are some things that make that very, very intriguing and open up some possibilities within the actions of how different governing bodies can act together. The last part of this that I want to talk about is how we've used tax increment financing with microblight and scattered site housing. Microblight is a term that I coined, and we'll talk about what that is and how you can do it. For many villages, you may not be interested in doing microblight. You may just blight your entire village, but for cities of the second class or cities of the first class, microblight is a way to use a scalpel instead of a bludgeon to redevelop specific properties. And we'll talk a little bit about TIF allowable expenditures. If you want me to, I can also talk specifically how TIF works and walk you through my quick demonstration of how TIF works. It's one of those things that I talk to with people all the time, and it usually takes 7 or 8 times of me explaining it for them, the light to go on, and they finally go, oh yeah, I think I get it, and I think I'll remember it this time, because the concept is not really, it's not all that hard, but it's foreign to us. Micro blight, we'll talk about what it is, why do it, who pays for it, and can you really do that? I've heard some differing opinions, but almost everybody I've talked to has finally decided that yes, you can really do this, and we've been doing it, so I hope you can do it. What is it? Well, there's a limitation on the declaration of a blighted area. Villages can do 100% of their municipal limits. Cities of the second class can do 50% of their municipal limits. And cities of the first class, primary, or metropolitan class can do 35%. First class would be anything over 5,000. Second class is anything between 800 and 5,000 that has not specifically voted to retain the village form of government. And villages would be anything less than 800 or less than 5,000 that had a general vote to maintain the village form of government and stay with a village board of trustees. So those things can make a difference. Within Grand Island, we are at about 23% blighted and substandard. So we've still got about 12% to go. We've got, which is really a pretty good number, but we don't want to waste the area that we could declare blighted and substandard. We'd like to do things where people want to do projects. A micro blight area is a very small area ranging from half a block to a couple of blocks. So it is very targeted. Under statute, there is no minimum size on the area that can be blighted, only an allowable maximum area. So that's why you can do the micro blight, is because they don't put a minimum size. You could do a single lot as a micro blight area. You do have to meet the requirements of blighted and substandard. And one of those requirements is that there are substandard structures, and it is structures with an S on the end. So you need to have at least 2 structures on the property in order for it to be declared blighted and substandard. A targeted approach, like I said, you can go down to that 1 lot level. You can go down to half a block. Generally, I don't like to go less than half a block, but I'll walk you through a project in just a few minutes. It is a targeted approach. Yeah, I like to call it using a scalpel instead of a bludgeon, because you can pick that half a block that has 1 or 2 really bad properties where there's somebody that wants to do something, and you can move it forward and take care of that 1 bad property and move forward from there. It's neighborhood scale. At a half a block or 2 blocks, it's not the whole city. It's not all that scary, and it's something that you can talk to the neighbors as they say, well, I don't want to be in a blighted area, but I really want you to do something about that house. Why can't you make that go away? This is a way to make that house that they want to go away and get it replaced with something else. Typically, the way we do these, we've got a redevelopment project ready to go. We've got an owner or somebody with an interest in a piece of property. Maybe they have an option on that piece of property that they will buy it if they can get TIF to redevelop it. So we're not just declaring an area blighted and substandard and hoping we get a developer. We've got a developer to begin with, and they're bringing the project to us. And it does do what the redevelopment law really was designed to do. It removes blighted and substandard conditions within our communities. If you look at the enabling legislation, the first paragraphs of the statutory authority, it is to remove blighted and substandard conditions. That's why we do this. Who pays for a microblight study? It could be the CRA, it could be the city, it could be the developer. In our case, it's almost always the developer who hires an independent consultant to do the study and bring that study forward to the city council and run it through the process and see if the city council is willing to declare the area blighted and substandard. There is no requirement for the city council or village board to make the declaration. It is entirely up to them. So it could be the worst area of your community, the one that you think is the most blighted and substandard, and your elected officials could choose not to declare it blighted and substandard, even if it meets all of the requirements, if they don't want to. If they don't want to open up redevelopment tools like TIF to that property. So you need to do some education with them so that they understand why this may be a benefit to them. The expense of the study can be reimbursed from tax increment financing on the project. So that developer is taking a chance that the study is going to get approved, but they have the opportunity to be reimbursed if and when they do a project and are paying their taxes and over the 15 years of that potential 15 years of that project. Can you really do microblight? Yes. Grand Island has 8 microblight areas of the 29 areas that we've declared blighted and substandard. Like I said, we're a little over 23% blighted and substandard. We've done 4 projects in those areas, and you'll see some of those projects or projects like those. And we have 2 more projects planned. Most of the time, the projects that we're talking about are replacing a single house with a duplex, or building a couple of houses or a couple of duplexes. These are not big projects. These are small projects that take investment, but not a huge amount of investment. And there's something that is probably on a scale that could be done in almost any community in the state of Nebraska. Our first microblight area was on South Kimball Street, south of Bismarck Road, just to the west of, or to the east of Locust Street. This map here, it shows the area that we did the microblight study on, and the area in green around there was an area that was previously declared blighted and substandard. So it's right next to an area that we had already declared blighted and substandard. The blue area there, kind of in the middle of that red box, that's where the property was that the developer wanted to redevelop. There was a very small house there that was old and falling apart and ready to be, it was tired and it was done. In fact, there it is. You probably have this house in your community. We've still got lots of them. It was built in the early 1900s and is about 700 square foot and just not in great shape. The microblight costs that were done for this, that were TIF eligible activities, was acquisition of the property at $18,000. They got 2 lots and the house for $18,000. And this would have been about 8 years ago. So if you paid $18,000 for a house in Grand Island, that house was actually lowering the value of the property, probably. As vacant lots, they probably would have been worth more. Demolition was $12,000. Site prep was $5,000. The blight study was $2,000. And then fees and contracts to set up the tax increment financing was $3,500. Total TIF eligible expenses was about $40,500. Again, we've got the original value, estimated value at time of completion was $168,000. The 2019 valuation of that property is $151,000. So, and then the TIF valuation is $133,000. It did not create as much value as we anticipated. That, the assessor's going to make that call eventually. There was a question that came through, what are the legal expenses? We do have an attorney that specializes in TIF that we have draw up all of our contracts. We have Mike Bacon with Bacon and Vinton out of Gothenburg draw up all of our contracts. I know there are a number of other attorneys that will do that as well, but we don't have the city attorney draw up the TIF contracts. And the CRA does actually have another attorney, but he is not comfortable drawing up TIF contracts. So we go out to somebody who knows what they're doing. And that has been a very good thing for us. We charge that that expense to the person making the request for TIF. And they pay that at the front end, and they're eligible to get that back through the tax increment as that walks through. The annual tax increment on this is about almost $3,000. We're expecting that this TIF will pay off in 13 years, give or take. Does that make sense to everyone? See, I'm used to doing this in front of a live audience in front of me, and you can all nod. So what are the typical housing related allowable TIF expenses? And we talk about allowable expenses because not every expense that you have in a TIF, in a project, is allowable for TIF. For instance, building the new house, the cost of building that house is not an allowable TIF expense, or didn't used to be. Now, under the workforce housing things and in a rural community, you may be able to even make that an allowable expense. That's something that I would discuss with your TIF attorney before you get too far into it. But I know that it is possible to actually make some of those costs of construction a TIF allowable expense. What that's going to do is really make sure that you lengthen the time that the TIF is available to that full 15 years in almost every case. Property acquisition is an allowable expense, demolition, site preparation, utility extensions and connections, public sidewalks, streets, landscaping, any of the TIF fees and contracts, any city fees that you may have. We charge $1,100 for a TIF application, and that covers the cost of our advertising to do a TIF project. Engineering and architecture costs, and then any interest and financing costs associated with the TIF bond. You can put an interest rate on your TIF bond. So you may have a $40,000 TIF bond with an interest rate of 3 or 5%. And Sharon can do those numbers in her head probably, and I can't. What that would really look like, but that means that every year when you're paying on that TIF bond, when the taxes come in, you're paying principal and interest. Typically, we write ours at 0% interest. And we're writing it for the full amount of the TIF at 0% interest, and we are treating it really more as a rebate back to the developer. We're probably getting close to my time. Tell me if I'm going to run out of time, but I'll keep talking on some of the other examples I've got here. I threw in a whole bunch more examples, and you will get copies of this, and you'll also get my contact information. So if you've got specific questions after you start looking at it, feel free to call me or email me and say, okay, what did you mean by this? Scattered site housing development and microblight, it's site-specific TIF for new housing is really what this amounts to. We've done it for duplexes and fourplexes. We may have one coming up that is going to be single family homes, where there's 3 homes on 3 lots in a, at what point do you unblight a microblight property? At the end of, when you no longer have an active TIF project on it, you can unblight it. You don't want to unblight something while there's an active TIF project on it, or that's what the attorneys have told me. So you're going to wait that 15 years, and you may want to, you're going to wait until that TIF project bond is paid off, and then decide whether you want to unblight it. Within Grand Island, I don't know that we would necessarily unblight any of those, because it just doesn't make that much difference within our overall numbers. Some of the smaller towns, especially cities of the second class, you may want to. Or if you don't have any activity in those areas, you might want to. We got another question there, and I didn't see it.
Chad, one question that was asked is, does the CRA have the same attorney as the City of Grand Island? And then we also have a question about site preparation. Does that include bringing the property into the 500 or 100-year floodplain into compliance?
Good questions. The CRA does not have the same attorney as the City of Grand Island. We have our own private attorney. The City of Grand Island has an appointed city attorney who is a full-time employee of the city. Most communities aren't going to have that. If you have the opportunity to do that, it's absolutely wonderful to be able to walk down to the city attorney's office and ask a question, and they don't hit the switch and start billing you. But we do have that advantage. But the CRA, when I call our CRA attorney, he hits the switch and starts billing me.
Okay. And then the other question is, would site preparation include bringing the property that is in the 500 or 100-year floodplain into compliance?
Yes, it would. And compliance with the 500-year, unless you've got a very strict flood ordinance, the model flood ordinances for Nebraska ignore the 500-year floodplain as not regulatory. It's more there as for your information. You may be subject to flooding, and if you're building critical infrastructure, you may want to do something a little bit different to protect to the 500-year level. The 100-year floodplain, you do need to bring that into compliance, and it would include any site work, dirt work, things that you need to do to bring that into compliance as part of your site preparation. And that can be a pretty significant expense that the property wouldn't develop if there weren't some way to pay for it, meaning tax increment financing.
Thanks, Chad. Go ahead.
One of the first projects we did as a scattered site housing was Blake and Dar, south of the old Lutheran Hospital here in Grand Island, if you're familiar with that area. Just a couple blocks north of the Union Pacific tracks, older part of the community. There's the house that was there. You can see what it looks like. Acquisition of the house and 2 lots in 2008 was $25,094. The owner of the property came in and said, or the person who was buying it came in and said, you know, I could fix this up. I could put $30,000 into it, and I would be able to make this work, but I'm not comfortable doing that. I really don't want anybody living in this house. Is there any way we can use tax increment financing to make it so that I can afford to put a couple of nice new duplexes in this neighborhood. The neighborhood was already zoned appropriately for the duplexes, so that wasn't an issue. And he bought the property, did the demolition, the site prep, the fees, architecture, financing. We ended up with about $55,000 worth of eligible expenses. And you'll notice the fees there are quite a bit lower. At that point, we were just paying for the attorney. And the attorney was giving us a really good deal on this at that point in time. The original value was $48,000, and estimated value at completion was $320,000. The current value is $325,000, so they're valued a little bit higher than we had anticipated. That makes sense because it's been 9 years. We'd hope that they would increase in valuation a little bit. TIF value is $277,000. The increment $6,200. That will pay off this year. So those two properties will, all of their taxes beginning January 1 will go to paying off, will go to the taxing entities. What did we get out of that? We took one substandard house that was truly substandard, and we took that and made it into 4 brand new affordable rental units. I think that's the kind of thing that can make a big difference in a neighborhood. I know that the house across the street sold at the same time, and it sold for $60,000 at the same time as the house that, as this house sold and before the duplexes went in. 4 years later, it sold for over $100,000. Why did it sell for over $100,000? They had made some improvements to it, but not a lot. A lot of it was that the neighborhood looked a whole lot nicer because this house was gone. And one house can drag down a neighborhood. And I'm sure all of you have seen that. So Blake and Dar, there's the new houses, and you can kind of see an aerial view of them. There's what the duplexes look like. A big difference from what was there. There's what they look like from the street side. Anna and Lincoln, this is another one we did. There was a house there, that yellow house. And I'll walk through this pretty quick. Whoops, I went the wrong direction, sorry. That's what you get for letting me drive. Anna and Lincoln, lot value, total valuation was about $64,000. There's what we ended up with there, brand new fourplex. Valuation of $270,000 was anticipated. And you can see the fourplex there. This was in an area that allowed a little bit higher density housing. Acquisition was $25,000, demolition $8,000, site prep was a little more on this. We had some more trees and things that needed to come down. Fees, again, this was before our fees went up. Financing $5,000. We had $55,000 worth of TIF on this project. The original value there was $63,000. Estimated value at completion was $293,000. The 2019 valuation is $436,000 on that fourplex. So it's gone up substantially more than we anticipated. And likely other properties in the neighborhood have also gone up. This one will also pay off in the next year. So we're finishing this one up. And as we get those finished up, those taxes go to all of the taxing entities. One thing I'd like to, I've got several other examples in here, and I'll let you look at those, and you can, if you've got questions, you can ask me those. I want to leave some time for questions from you, but I do want to throw in a caveat that the changes to the community redevelopment law as of last year that went into effect in July of 2018, they require that anytime you are doing housing and using TIF for housing, you have to include in your redevelopment plan the impact to the schools. And that was one of the things that they got thrown in, that the school systems, they're concerned when you start using TIF for housing, and they're rightfully concerned when you're using TIF for housing, especially if the school system is at capacity. If it's not at capacity, there's not a lot of impact overall, because if they've got empty seats and empty desks, they can fit more kids in without increasing the cost substantially. If they don't have empty desks and they're starting to talk about building new buildings or hiring more teachers, that's where the impact comes in. And you do need to work with your school system to come up with a way to estimate that impact. I've got several redevelopment plans on our website where I have a formula that I've developed to come up with what those impacts are. I don't know that I'm not overly confident in it, but nobody's challenged me on it. So I'm going to continue with it until I get challenged on it or somebody helps me figure out something better. We got a question on extremely blighted. Let me open that up. Grand Island is going to go through the extremely blighted process. We have a couple of areas of the community where we can do that. I think that there are some interesting things with the extremely blighted in that it needs to be an area where HUD has identified it as 51% LMI, and those can change on a year-to-year basis. And they follow census tracts. They don't follow blighted and substandard areas necessarily. So it's one of those that I think it's going to take some time to figure that out. But what it does allow you to do in those extremely blighted areas is to extend the term of the TIF to 20 years. So that may encourage more development in those areas and more redevelopment. And I think it's something that fits in well with the micro blight and scattered site housing that I've been talking about here. We have, let's see, North Ruby. Sorry. There was the house, there's the duplex. Now you notice this looks a lot like the duplexes that were built on the other area. That's because it's the same builder who built several of these. Todd Inc., TC Inc., Home Builders. He really did these to keep his crew together when he was, as a project, when he didn't have other things to do. That's something that if you've got builders in your community, that's something that they may be willing to do, because there are times when they've got downtime and the guys need a paycheck or they're going to go work somewhere else. Or if you can have them working on something like this when you've got downtime, it keeps that employment going. One of the other impacts of housing, National Home Builders Association says that a new single family home is the equivalent of 2.5 full-time equivalent jobs in your community. So there are a lot of communities that if somebody came in and said, I'm going to hire 5 people, they would say, wow, that we want you to come in. I'm going to hire 25 people. Well, that's building 2 houses. That's building 10 houses. So remember that, and make sure that people understand that in your community, that it really does have that kind of impact on your community.
Okay. Chad, do you have some time for some questions?
I do.
Okay. And I know we didn't get through all of your slides, but we will be sending those out. And as Chad said, you know, he's more than happy to be in contact with you. One question I had is a community ever too small to have a CRA? I know you mentioned Scotia, but they could have. Is there ever a chance when it's too
Uh,
small? Or what options are available to very small communities?
Well, they could also do a community development agency, which allows the governing body, whether that's the village board or city council, to sit as the CRA.
Okay.
So you end up with that same group of people that's already looking at this, looking at it from more than one perspective and making decisions from more than one perspective. They typically would need to adjourn from a city council meeting to this community development agency meeting, and then adjourn that meeting and go back into the city council session. But they could actually speed up the process a little bit by doing that, because they're meeting at the same time, they're the same group, they could make the referral directly to the city council and deal with those things all at the same night.
Okay, super, thank you. I had also talked to Chad about maybe doing some reverse Q&A. So as you're pondering your questions, and we'll probably run a little bit long, but it's a good topic. What questions, Chad, do you have for our group today?
Well, the main question I have is, what pieces of property do you have in your community that your that you could use in order to, if you could get somebody to develop it, if you could give it away, could you get somebody to come in and redevelop that? And could they do it with, you could even use TIF on those projects as well. And if you're doing housing and you're doing workforce development housing, you can actually pay for part of that structure with the TIF. Is that enough to make things happen in your communities? Anybody?
So the question has been posed. Who's up to the challenge of sharing some information? Either your chat box or your microphone?
You know, I can't speak for any one community, but through our rural workforce housing, we are working with a couple different communities that they either have a dilapidated house or they've already taken the house out, and they are working with, if we can use TIF, we can get that demo done and we can go in and put a house in there. And I think it'll make a big difference in these communities. I'm excited about the opportunity to work in them.
Who else has something? As Chad was chatting and talking, did you have an aha that popped into your mind that we could maybe do this on a property in our community?
So while they're pondering, I had a question for Chad.
Yes.
As we're working with some of these communities, of course, they all have their own city attorney, and we have been encouraging them to use one of the ones that really do this as a huge part of their business. It's something they work in every day. But would you just speak to that again, as to, you know, what those risks are if you're not, or the efficiencies, or, you know, would you just speak to that again?
I'd be happy to, and we've done it both ways. As you mentioned, I've been the director of our Community Redevelopment Authority since 2004, so 15 years. And when I started out, we weren't doing a whole lot of TIF projects, but the ones we did, we had our local attorney, who was the attorney for the CRA, put all of that together. And he did a pretty good job. I'm not going to say that he didn't do a good job, but there are things that I look at that we did then that I would not do now. I've learned. And that's part of all of this is, always do it better. And there are better ways to do things. And if you don't have the expertise in putting these things together, there are so many intricacies on what you can really do that it makes sense to pay somebody else to do it and to build that into the expense of the tax increment financing. And it is eligible to be reimbursed through the tax increment financing. So
Awesome.
because of that, talk to one of the firms that does this regularly. It is really my advice.
Thank you.
Chad, we have a question from Megan. She wanted to know, were the properties that were acquired in Grand Island for sale?
They were for sale, and they are, and Grand Island did not acquire those. Those were acquired by the private developer. And one of the changes that was done last August or July is they clarified that property that was previously acquired is eligible for TIF. Acquisition is an eligible expenditure. So if I bought one of those houses for $40,000 today and wanted to do a project 3 years from now, I could use that $40,000 that I acquired it for as part of my allowable expenditures. And that's very clear in statute now that it didn't used to be. It makes it a little harder to meet the but-for clause. But for tax increment financing, this project doesn't move forward. It's easier to meet that when you haven't purchased the property yet.
Okay, good, thank you. So I put in the chat box, what's one point or statement that's been made that wants you to go out and do a little bit more investigation about using a CRA in housing development? We've got some great comments in the chat box, the statements that are being made. Star likes the list of eligible expenses. Sharon's excited about all the success that she's seeing happen in GI, providing workforce housing and increasing valuations. But there's something that you heard today that's makes you excited to want to know more about using the CRA in housing development. And as you ponder that, Chad, once again, could you just tell us how to get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me at my email address, which is cnabity@grand-island.com, or you can call me at 308-385-5240.
Okay.
I'm happy to talk to people and walk through what we've done, talk to you about your project and the way I would approach it. That isn't necessarily the only way it can be done. I won't even say that's necessarily the right way, but it's what I would do and how I would approach it and the kinds of questions I would ask of somebody coming into my office with that kind of project.
Okay, thank you. Well, as we begin to wrap up the afternoon, I just want to say a big thank you to Chad, hearing good comments through the chat box about the information you've provided. So, Chad, thank you for taking the time out of your day. I know you're an extremely busy individual, and I greatly appreciate it, as we all do here at SCED. I just want to touch on a couple things that are coming up very quickly that I'm excited to share with you. If you were with us on last month's webinar, Ben Winchester talked about how in the next 20 to 25 years, 75% of our housing stock will be changing hands. And so that poses an immense challenge for us in rural Nebraska, but it's also a great opportunity for us to begin now and think about how we can renew and modernize the existing housing in our communities. So our fall gathering is coming up in 3 weeks? I didn't do the math. I'd probably be afraid if I did do the math, but November 7th and 8th right here in Holdridge, the fall gathering will take place, and we will be discussing this topic about renewing and modernizing our our tired housing in our communities. In addition to great topics, we're going to have a panel discussion, and then Phelps County Development Corporation is going to be showcasing some of the things that they have going on in the community and in the area. So I want to encourage all of you to attend. Registration information is available, and that is live at the link that is there at the bottom of the screen. I believe early bird expires October 31st. Is that correct? And room rates are available for the gathering at the Roadway Inn. So be sure and take advantage of that opportunity and get registered as soon as you can. So our next webinar, for those of you who want to know, will be November 21st, once again at 2 o'clock. I'm really excited about this webinar as well. I think they just keep getting better and better. We are going to be showcasing the 2019 Showcase Community, featuring the story of Central City. So if you don't know what a Showcase Community is, basically what that means is that in April of 2019, this year, the City of Central City received the Governor's Showcase Community Award, and that award is presented by the Governor annually and honors a rural Nebraska community for outstanding achievement in both community and economic development. So Central City received that award in April, and we're going to be hearing from them because those achievements that got them that award didn't happen overnight. Their leadership has done some pretty heavy lifting over the years to make their community showcase worthy. So leaders and volunteers will perhaps be joining us talking about the difficult and different methods and action steps that they have taken over the time to improve their community throughout housing, community, and economic development. So I hope you'll join us on November 21st as we showcase the success story that is Central City. So, and then finally, we shared this last month with you, but I just wanted to reiterate it that this is a quote I heard on a podcast: feedback is the breakfast of champions. And we want to know what HomeNE is doing for all of you. So I've listed our contact information there for Sharon, Levi, and myself. Please feel free to drop us an email. We'd also like to hear about speaker opportunities. Maybe you're attending some things that we don't get a chance to go to or not in our region that you think might be a great future topic for us. So our goal is to make this learning network stretch across the state of Nebraska. So we welcome your input. As I said, as we began, we learn best when we learn together. So there's our emails and our phone number, and we would welcome your feedback on what we're doing with HomeNE as well as future topic suggestions. So with that, are there any last minute questions for Chad or for any of us? If not, then I just thank you again for joining us and encourage you to get back outside if you can and enjoy this wonderful day. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chad.
Yes, thanks, Chad.
Yeah.
Happy to do it.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you at the gathering, I hope. It's going to be a great time in Holdridge, so get registered and plan to come.
Bye.
Bye.
Maybe. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Did somebody have something to share?
I think they were just getting,
Okay.
yeah.
I know Joni had to leave, she said.
Yeah. I'm removing them one at a time. Otherwise, it makes me be removed. It removes you and I too. Jen. Okay.
Okay.
Was it just me, Levi, or was Lori going a little in and out
I don't
on
think
her
I noticed
audio?
that.
You didn't notice it?
No.
I had one moment where like the timer thing came on, the twirly thing.
I'm gonna stop our recording.